Hey, my name is Stephanie, and if you've been watching our Book to Action series so far, you'll know that I'm an adult services librarian with the Monrovia Public Library. I'm really excited to introduce an event to you today that we held in partnership with an incredible human being named Christopher Tadai Diaz, who shares about the importance of fire to land stewardship, to Indigenous people and their ceremonies. Just a quick heads up, we had a small error with the Zoom recording, so there'll be parts where you'll notice folks that are speaking, but you won't be able to see them. It does correct itself later on in the recording, but just a quick heads up on that. And with that, I'm so excited for you to meet Christopher. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of being here with Christopher Tadai Diaz of the Chumash tribe, the Tohono O'odham tribe, and the Mayo tribe. Christopher is son of Raymond and Suzanne Diaz, grandson of Joseph and Rosita Moreno. He is also the firekeeper and feather keeper of his family. Christopher has worked to share and promote Native culture in Southern California and build connections between communities through education, storytelling, public exhibits, and cultural events and other community work. For the past 30 years, he has presented on the California mission history from the Native perspective to 4th and 5th grade students throughout the greater Los Angeles area. He is also a sign language interpreter at Long Beach City College, guest speaker for the college's cultural anthropology and history departments, and has been advisor to the LBCC Native American Club. He also has been involved as a sacred site monitor for the Tongva people and has been firekeeper for ceremonies on the sacred site of Pavungna, which occupies the land where California State University Long Beach now stands. Diaz has also helped to facilitate relationships between California Natives people and the Catholic Church and has been the primary interpreter for the Office of Native American Ministries for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. He currently is part of a coalition to save the sacred site of Pavungna from being developed by CSU Long Beach. He is also a Native American artist with a focus on Chumash culture and sells his artwork and crafts throughout the powwow circuit. So today we are going to enjoy a lovely talk with Christopher. And throughout, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and make sure you select 2 panelists and attendees so everyone can see. And we will get those questions answered at the very end with the Q&A. And with that, I will pass it over to Christopher. Thank you so much for being here, and you are free to get started when you are ready.
Haku, everyone. Haku in my language, Chumash, is our way of saying hello. So Haku, welcome today. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here, for inviting me to come and speak to you today. Before we get started, I do want to thank the Tongva people for allowing me to speak on their lands, for me to be here to represent my people, but also to represent a lot of culture throughout Native country, whether it's from the East Coast to the West Coast. But we always thank the Tongva since we are, for the most part, and if you're in anywhere in Southern California, you are a great deal, you're probably on Tongva land. Anywhere from San Gabriel to the ocean to Seal Beach all the way to Malibu, almost to the edge of San Fernando Valley, you would be probably in Tongva land. So thank you to those ancestors. Thank you to the people who are still alive here representing Tongva, their people. And thank you very much, both Rachel and Stephanie, Whittier and Monrovia Libraries for inviting me to come and speak today. And again, thank you to all those who showed up today and took the time to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, share my culture with you, and to talk and visit and give you an opportunity to learn a little bit about myself, a little bit about my culture, and a little bit about our perspective on how we see in today's topic, what we're going to talk about is fire, our relationship with fire. So what I wanted to do was to start off with a poem that was written in 2012, and it's called Fire, Keeping the Fire. And it starts off at, It's 3 a.m. Sunday morning. We've been gathered now for several days, now to honor the crossing of my Nani. My family is resting after a long and beautiful day filled with laughter, song, prayer, crying, and more song. Our children have been running and playing, smiles on their faces, cousins playing the guitar and talking of times growing up. Dad and the uncles are playing a little dominoes in the corner, and mom and the aunts are cooking and watching over our Nani. People came, people went, people stayed, people sit by her side. One by one, they would find their way to the fire to sit a while in a quiet reflection of a prayer. They would offer up their tobacco and share in our sage, cleaning their minds, hearts, and bodies. Tears often come and fall across their cheeks when they hold our memories too tight. And the knowing of why we are gathered. We will miss our Nani. We miss her already. Our fire is burning soft at the moment, and the fog is rolling in. It's green wood, so it pops a lot and spits out steam. The altar in the corner glows off to the left, filled with offering, pictures, and flowers. I just caught the face of my grandparents in the picture of my mom. My mom put on the table, and I hear the songs coming from my Nani's window. Like me, the fire wants to sleep, but I know that it's not time yet. My Nani isn't ready yet. I have to wake up sometimes. It warms up, and then it's all good. Morning is just a couple hours away, and it's so quiet. Only the crackling of the fire is there. I'm loving my family very much right now. All flaked out wherever they could find a spice. Reminds me of the old res days at Christmas, people scattered all over. The fire so all of a sudden woke up and reminded me what I'm doing here. It's now 3:16 in the morning. I'm keeping our family's fire ceremony to honor our ancestors, to honor my Nani. It's a good morning to be me. I'm so blessed to be doing what I am doing, keeping the fires for our family. Every piece of wood offered with a prayer for a safe crossing, offered with love. The fire knows this. It shines bright and warm like the love gathered here. The fog is rolling in thicker now, but soon the sun will push the air down and the cold morning chill will reach and touch everyone's nose. Better make sure I'm ready. Family will start to wake soon and we will welcome the sun, and sing more songs, eat more food, laugh and cry some more. And then we'll all go home. I'll miss each and every one of them. Again, I'm feeling thankful that they trusted me for keeping our family's fire. I'm blessed to be part of this family. Love and songs to all of you. Sleep good. I'll wake you when it's time to get up. The fire is burning soft again, so I better get back to my job. Morning is broken, faces are tired, off from a long night. My ancestors are gathering. They welcome my Nani. We all feel her spirit lifting from her body. My family's gathered outside the room, everyone wanting to say goodbye. But I am here sitting on the side, keeping my family's fire, watching her fire, offering prayer and song by myself, talking to the flame and listening to what it wants and what it needs. Her body's going and her spirit's lifted. Only remains is the shell of my grandmother. My grandmother has left us to join my ancestors. My heart both rejoices and crashes. Her fire is gone. We no longer feed it. We let it go. And we say thank you for giving us this opportunity to show that we love you and that we respect the old ways. Thank you for listening to that. I read that to you to give you a little glimpse into our ceremony. Our fires are so sacred to us. They are one of the centerpieces to our existence. As human beings, that's what we needed. We rely on the four elements of wind, water, earth, and fire. And when we recognize these things as Native people, we recognize them all to be living entities. Throughout the world, we talk about global warming, we talk about taking care of the earth because we believe the earth to be alive. We look at our oceans and our waters and we see all the things that are inside it, and we recognize that the water is alive. We look at the air and the wind and we see the toxins and things, and so we recognize the air is alive. But very seldom do we recognize that fire too is alive. Throughout history, all over the world, people have recognized the need for fire, not just for warmth, not just to cook our food, but we've recognized that fire needs to exist in this world. Nature itself has taken its toll on this earth and placed fire all over, through lightning strikes, through rocks falling, boulders falling and striking each other, and a spark ignites a fire. All these different natural ways that fires have just started, volcanoes coming through, exploding, and catching fires in where those volcanoes are, and all of a sudden fires just roar through, cleansing the earth, cleansing the way around it. So it's a natural part of who we are. We have become so evasive ourselves throughout the world that we see fire as an enemy for the most part, unless we're cooking a hamburger or a steak or putting it in our fire and enjoying it at camp. But out of those contexts, we normally see fire as this enemy that we have to fight every year. We are we're already in our fire season here in California, and we're getting ready to fight all those hundreds of fires that are going to burn up and down the state. But Indigenous people all over the world have been using our fires in the way that we knew that it should. We followed the example of just nature itself, and we started using it to cultivate. Our best example here in California would be, or a good example, is if you go into Yosemite, the Miwok people up there, and then the Mono and the Chuchensi and the Yokut, when they came into the Yosemite area, before they would actually burn areas, and they would burn it for a certain reason. They would burn it because they wanted to clear areas out so that the grasses would grow, so more deer and elk and moose would come to those areas and feed off the grasslands. So the people there would purposely burn part of the forest for that reason. Also, we understood that with the relationship we had with nature, that we saw that the pine cones opened up better and faster with fire. And so we would gather them and we would burn those so that we can get the pine cones to open up. And then we would purposely seed areas in Yosemite. There's whole oak groves there that they've been shown that those were purposely grown by the native people of Yosemite. And they did that because they wanted to gather acorn so that we can crush it up and use it for our flowers and eat it, since acorn was a main staple here in California and throughout Indian country where there was a lot of oak. But so we would gather all those acorns up, but we found that, we can plant them, and they would plant these whole areas of just, oaks where they'd had the acorn growing. You go into some parts of Arizona, Nevada, even other areas where they collect pine nut. They did the same thing there. They realized that, hey, we can burn these areas. We can actually plant these pine trees so that we can gather in a later time, even though we knew it took a long time for a pine tree to grow. we knew that we can gather those at a later time so that we didn't have to go so far to gather. We can bring the plants closer to us. We also did it for cultivation, for pest control. So we used fire in a very special way, and we knew the relationship between nature and what it could do with our plants, and then what it can do now. We still, some places still do burnings, not as often, especially as Native people. We don't get an opportunity to burn as much because we don't have that much land to burn. Laws prevent us from being able to do things like that. And just the size of the properties, you know, when we look at lands that Native people have, especially here in California, the lands that are occupied by my people, you know, whichever tribe you're talking about, the lands are not that large to be able to hold a controlled burn like that. So you won't see those types of burnings anymore. But we understood that. And now, you know, with things that how time has gone on, a lot of that tradition, a lot of those customs, a lot of those knowings have gotten lost through time. Now you pretty much have to study it, you know, in college, or study it on your own to be able to understand that this took place at one time. Or you watch it, you know, you can YouTube it anytime you want, you can research that. Other parts of the world, there are indigenous people who are still practicing burnings like that. So it's something that is much welcomed in Native perspective, not just Native American, but we're talking about Natives throughout the world have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. You know, here in California, we've been doing it for 13, 15, 20,000 years. We've been doing burnings. And it's only been recent in the last, 300, 500 years that we haven't done that. We haven't been able to practice that. When the United States became what it was, we were not even allowed to do that, because when we did burnings like that, it was ceremony. It was not just burning a forest down or a section of the forest. It was a prayer that was done. It was ceremony done, because we had to do a planting afterwards. We had to do a cultivation. We had to move things. We had to clean all that burn out so that the land can absorb all that carbon back into the earth so that we can plant. So for us, it was also very ceremonial for us to do that. And so songs were sung, dances were done prior to when burnings were done. Songs were sung during the burnings. In the village, there would be prayers still going on by certain people for those who are out there burning, preparing those areas. Songs done and prayers done for those who are gathering the seeds that are going to one day be planted in their area, to bring more oak so that we can have more acorn, or more pine so that we can have more pine nut, or cleaning up the field so that we can have more grassland for the animals to come, to make our hunting better, or easier for us, and more accessible to us. So even those kind of burnings were very, very much wrapped up in ceremony. So that's where I kind of wanted to share that portion of with you in regards to how this process is going, what we've been talking about. And I think those of you who have been participants lately with what we're doing here, it kind of goes with that. But I also wanted to share with you some of what we do now. Because we can't do those, there are so many other ceremonies that still involve fire. And I've been very, very fortunate in my life that I am my family's fire keeper. I'm one of the fire keepers for our tribe, our Chumash people. I'm also a fire keeper for Tongva, so whenever they need. And I'm a fire keeper at the sacred site Puvungna, which is on Cal State University, Long Beach. We hold bear ceremony there. We hold other ceremonies there at Cal State Long Beach throughout the year. And when they do, I'm usually the one that does the fire keeping there. When we do Sweat Lodge, I'm one of their fire keepers for Sweat. I am the main fire keeper for Bear Dance. And the reason why is because when you are called to be a fire keeper, it's a calling that is sometimes you're chosen by your family, you're chosen by your elders. There's something in a person that shows that this person is where they're supposed to go. It was not something that I chose to be. It is something that chose me. And then my elders saw that this is where I should go, and they called upon me to take on this responsibility for our family. And we don't have a lot of fire keepers anymore. We don't have a lot of ceremonial keepers. We're all getting older. And so to pass it down to the next generation is getting more and more difficult. Here in our people now, we struggle with passing down those traditions, those customs, those ceremonies, the songs, the dances, the prayers. And so, like for Tongva, when we do things there, I'm a Chumash and Tohono Ota Mayo. Technically, this is not my land, but because we struggle, all of us, we struggle passing it down, there's nobody to take on those traditions, those ceremonies. So we sometimes borrow from other people who are very similar. Chumash being very similar cousins to Tongva. Our native dress is very similar. Some of our ceremonies are very similar. Our language is very, very difficult because we are a very old tribe, an old people. We're one of the oldest people in North America. We predate the Tongva people in Southern California. And so, but we have become very similar in the way we do things. So for me to be asked to come and do that is just, it's a good fit for them until Tongva can find another person, young, old, to be able to take on that part for them. And then they wouldn't need me to come in and do it. They would have their own person to come and do it in their own languages, in their own specific way. There's a way that they would do it that we wouldn't. But we share those things with each other. And as a fire keeper, you have a relationship with fire. Like I said, fire is a living, breathing thing. And you learn from other fire keepers when you go to ceremony. If you are a fire keeper yourself, you will go to ceremony and you will ask permission to sit with their fire keeper. And you have conversation about what they do, how they do things. So everything that I do now, some of it was taught to me as I was growing up. Some from my grandfather, some from John Moreno Sr., some from my brother who crossed over as well, Gerald Medicine Bird of Cheyenne, and other fire keepers who have shared their knowledge with me, older fire keepers, even younger fire keepers who were taught by another person above them who was taught by someone else and passed it down. And in our conversations, we find that that makes sense to me. There was a time when I didn't put water in my fire. And just a couple of years ago at my brother's ceremony, when my brother crossed over, we will be celebrating his 3rd year this year. So his 1st year of his ceremony, I was burning his fire. And my mother came and asked me, she asked me, why are you putting water in your fire? And I told my mom, because this is something that made sense to me. Talking to other fire keepers, older men, they explained to me that we have the 4 elements when we talk about fire. It's burning on the earth, so we have the earth there. It is consuming the oxygen, so it has the air. It's fire in itself, so by itself, it's the 3rd element. But for it to be a complete circle, that it needed to have the water fed into it. And so to make that whole connection of all 4 elements be one, and so everything, the whole ceremony to be one, I started adding water to my fire, which sounds counterproductive if you think, because we usually put water to put out fire. But it put in the right amount, it creates the steam, which also creates more oxygen, which actually fed my fire more. And the more I've done that, the more I've realized, hey, I get a better understanding of where my fire is. You learn to read the fire and to listen to it. It has a lot of different personalities to it. Fire itself can be a very voracious, destructive force when it just really captures that wood and real dry wood and just eats it up. And the hunger it has can be just, voracious and just, amazing how much it could just consume in such a short time, and the violence of that flame that it can have. And when you touch it, it could burn you, from 2-3 feet away. It can be so hot, you can feel that heat. And then at the same time, you can see large, beautiful flames in the fire, and it can be as quiet as a whisper. And when you pay attention to what this fire is saying, you can see that fire has personality. It has a mind of its own. It has a hunger. It has these different feelings. It has anger. It has sorrow. During my grandmother's ceremony, my grandfather's ceremony too, when I did his, the fire became very soft, very quiet. No matter how much wood I put in it, or dry wood, or what kind of wood I put in, the fire would just stay very quiet, because it knew that at these moments, it was not time for it to really show its strength. Its strength was in its quietness and the peacefulness. And it was a very cold flame. The last ceremony we had at Pavunga, there was flame there, and I was telling a young man that I was had there watching, hoping that maybe he might be a firekeeper in the future. I was instructing him and showing him that these flames that were in front of us were cold flames. You can put your hand in there, and it didn't burn you. It was warm to the touch, but it didn't like scorch you. It was not that kind of a flame. And you can put your hands over it like this, and it would just kind of smoke your hand a little bit, and it was warm, but it wasn't a hot flame. You can move the wood around with your hands without having to jerk and do it real fast to turn the log over. That's because the fire itself was a very calm, very quiet, very cool fire. And then I've had fires where just very little flame was extremely hot. I've had angry fires that were not happy with the way I was doing things, and I knew it. I knew that I was not paying the attention that it needed to, that it wanted something else from me. And so when you're a firekeeper, you build these relationships with the flame, with the fire, with the wood that goes into the fire, and with the water, with the sage and the tobaccos that you're putting in the fire, the songs that are sung. Some of these songs are sang so that the fire will rise up and take prayers up. Some songs are sung so that the fire will calm down because it's too hot and there's too many sparks, and you don't want it to get out of control and then get out of the ring and go in places where it's not supposed to go. So there's songs that we sing to calm the fire down, to bring it back to its own center, so that the fire knows what it's doing there. In our fires, when we do fires for ceremony, it's a very different type of fire. No extra things are added. So you don't use newspaper to start your fire. You don't use some kind of chemical fluid to starter fluid to start your fire. You're not even allowed to, we don't even, if you're very traditional, you don't even use a lighter. Your fire must be struck because it shows that you understand that we can make fire. We don't need something else to do it. So when we do our fires, when I'm doing this, I strike my fires all the time. I will go and gather everything. My wood are cut a certain way. They're stacked a certain way. And then I go and get the grasses that I need to start my fires, and they're set a certain way. and then I will strike a fire every time with all those people there. And sometimes it'll light the first shot. Sometimes it'll take 10 times. And it's a difficult thing when you have all these people watching, but all these people could be, 200, 300, 400 people watching you start this fire. But they understand why you're lighting the fire this way, that it has to be done an old way, a more natural way of doing it. So it would be flint and steel, or flint, or it would be, rubbing, striking a fire with wood, doing a bow or by hand, like that. So depending on where I go, I'll light my fires differently. When I go camping, when I taught my children to go camping, they were not allowed to have a fire unless they can strike a fire. When I got married, my wife had to strike a fire. Otherwise, you are not allowed to have a fire. So you have to learn how to do that in my family. Otherwise, you can't have one. Oh, well, you're going to be cold tonight and there's not going to be any s'mores, at our fire tonight. And there's not going to be any crackling in the middle of the night of, being warm. Everyone's going to bed a little bit early, I guess. But both my kids know how to strike a fire. My wife knows how to strike a fire, and it's a great feeling. But it's the more natural way of doing it. We take advantage. We take it for granted, the things that we have matches and lighters, other things like that, to be able to light our fires. But in our family, you're not allowed to. As a fire keeper, you're not allowed to, really, if you're a very traditional person. Fire itself is one of the centerpieces of our culture. It during our bear ceremonies, fire is there to warm us, but it's also there to take all our prayers up. So when we do a lot of our ceremonies and we will have a fire, people will come and they'll set their prayers in the fire. Like a lot of different religions, they have incense, and they believe that the prayers go up with the incense to our Creator God. The same thing with our fire. We believe that when we put our prayers in the fire, it goes up to our Creator, to our ancestors, in a way that's different than when we just speak words or we pray in our mind and our hearts. It's a physicalness of being able to put something in the fire and watching it burn and letting it go and speaking to that prayer in the fire and watching those sparks go up or that smoke go up and go into knowing that it's going in a place that I cannot touch right now. And it's a physicalness that we need to see sometimes. And so when we do our ceremonies, it's a very, very intricate part of what we do, as well as keeping us warm and keeping a light for us to follow. It does that as well. But for the most part, it's a dance for the fire keeper. You sit and you watch, you listen, you talk to the fire, you sing to the fire. Every piece of wood, if you're a very traditional fire keeper like myself, every piece of wood has a prayer before it's put in the fire. It has a song to it. And so it keeps the fire in that ceremony place itself. And then when it's all over, the fire wants to go, or it's time to let the fire go. It's a very solemn time, depending on what the ceremony is. Sometimes we just stop feeding the fire and we let it die out. As fire keeper, you never just leave your fire. Firekeeper job could start days before the ceremony, preparing the area where the fire is going to be burned, the wood that's going to be used in the fire, where it's going to be stacked, how it's going to be cut, what piece goes in first. There's a lot of thought to it, a lot of ceremony, and just the preparation of getting your fires ready. the songs that take place just to put the pit together sometimes. And then when the fire is let go to fall asleep and be out, it doesn't stop there. Some fires, the ground stays hot for hours and hours. And so the firekeeper has to tend that too, and has to wait for the ground to cool down enough before they can leave. Because otherwise fires can start on their own and go places where we don't want them to go. And so we have to be vigilant, and we have to be very careful with that. We don't just put water on our fires, unless, sometimes there's laws and places that don't allow us to spend, hours and hours and hours there, watching that fire go down, watching those embers go out, watching them cool down. And some of our fires are so hot that they will stay hot for days, sometimes afterwards. And so we don't have that opportunity. So we've had to adjust some of our traditions, some of our ceremonies, to be able to do it in an urban environment. Cal State University Long Beach is a good example of that. When we do ceremony at Cal State Long Beach, our fire gets so hot that it would last for a couple days there. And if I wanted to, maybe 2 days later, I can start a fire just by moving some embers around, digging down a little bit and putting some paper or some grass there. And I can start a fire there all over again. But because of the laws that we have on those public lands, that's one where we actually do have to put water on it. And so we've started singing new songs to apologize to the fire, to apologize to the ring, that we're doing things this way, that this is not the way we'd normally do it. So we've had to adapt as Native people to an urban environment that doesn't allow us to do things like we normally would, which would be let this fire go, stay there. I would tend that until it's no longer a danger. And the top is cool, but the core of the bottom of the bowl is still very hot, and could take 2-3 days for that to finally cool off. But here, now we have to flood the pit with water, and it'll boil and boil, and the next day it'll still be warm, but it won't be hot enough to start a fire. And then that's, I think, one of the sadnesses that we have, is that there's so many people in a city, and that we live in an environment that doesn't allow us to be able to hold ceremony anymore the way we'd want to, that we have to make those adjustments. And so what we've done is we've come up with ways to be able to apologize to the fire, because like I said, we believe that fire is a living entity. It's a living, breathing being to us, especially those of us who are trusted in taking care of it and doing those ceremonies. And so, we've adapted, we've come up with new ways, new ceremonies have come up to be able to take care of those issues that have come up, living in an urban environment. Places like Monrovia, you cannot just have a fire in the mountains anymore like we once did. We saw what the Bobcat fire did to the Monrovia area. When not in check, it can be devastating. For a lot of Native people like myself, my daughter, we recognize that that's just a natural part of life. And so we don't see it as destructive, except for that we've built too close into those areas. We've built so many houses so close and into the woods that now when there's a fire, a natural fire, it destroys properties. And although we feel bad for those people, we also have an understanding that this is still a natural occurrence that happens. Does it happen more often? Yes. And I think part of that is because we, as human beings, we become so evasive into our forests. Our forest management isn't there as the way it should be, the way it could be. we didn't have as many of those problems as Native people before colonization. One, because there wasn't as many of us, to be honest, there wasn't that many of us. So it didn't affect us as much. We lived with the earth so that we understood where we could burn. We burned a certain area, we controlled it. We burned in small section, then we burned another small section, and another small section. We didn't just light the whole thing on fire. We burnt it in sections so that we can control how we wanted to do it. But we understood that when this thing took off due to a lightning strike, that that was just another part of nature. And we understood that, and we lived with that understanding and that knowledge of what it could do. We learned from that, those fires, and from nature saying, this burns, this happens. It will grow back again, but can we use that? And so we started doing that. With our land management now, we can't go in there and just do burns like we wanted to, because you have houses all over the place in there. So we can't just do that. We also, everything is built on such a monetary system that it takes money to be able to sit there and do burns. And who's going to pay for that? The taxpayer is going to pay for those burns. That can be extremely expensive, unbelievably expensive, to have firefighters go up and down the state doing controlled burns, which they do, but to the scale in which they need to is just, it's just impossible to be able to do it, because the money is not there. And because as a society, we have trusted only a small group of people, these firefighters, to be able to do those things, who have these expertise in being able to control that. There's not enough of them to be able to go up and do as much as they need to do. And the money is just not there to be able to get more people to be able to do that in a controlled way. If we could, then I think we would see less destructive fires. Destructive when it comes down to people, human beings, homes, that kind of, when I'm talking about destructive. As far as the forest is concerned, as a Native person, I don't always see it as a destructive force. I see it as a rebirth, a renewal, a recycling of itself. It's time, it needed to be burned. It wanted to be burned. Nature started something. Here it is. All that fuel is being burned. And if you look what's happening in Monrovia now and other places that have been burned, you have new growth. It's coming back, and it will come back again and again and again. And because that's just the natural cycle of the way things are. So for us as Native people, we don't always see it as a destructive force like the Bobcat Fire, although there were homes in danger. Maybe some, I don't know how many homes may have been destroyed during the Bobcat Fire. But the forest itself, I don't see that as a destructive thing to the Monrovia area. I see it as a good thing to it, because it took away a lot of fuel that was there that needed to be gone. I think it's fed the earth minerals and things that it needed in the earth, that it needed for a long time. And now you see these beautiful plants growing, and it's getting lush and green like it's always been, but it's going to be a much more beautiful place. Will it change? Yes. Maybe a couple paths need to be changed a little bit here and tweaked there. Different things need to be moved around, but overall, it's a blessing when we can have that opportunity to have a natural burn like that and take away all that fuel. The sadness is that there are human beings who are affected by it, whether it be their homes or lives, unfortunately, because we have just become too much living there, but not living with. And I think that also is one of our issues that we have to address, is that how we live with our forests, with our grasslands. Are we living with them, or are we living amongst them, or are we just living there? we've lost that relationship that we once had with the land, with our forests, with our streams. We've lost our relationship with that. We live in the forest. We don't live with the forest anymore as a people, as a whole. And I think that is probably one of our biggest sadnesses. And that's a global thing. That's our global thing, not just when it comes down to talking about fires, but I think it's a global thing when we talk about all of it. We have, as a people, as a species, we have lost our knowing of how to live with the earth, that we are actually part of it, and we live on it. We live on earth as a whole, even though there are a lot of people who understand what I'm talking about and understand the relationship that we need to have with nature, with the earth, with all the different entities. As a whole, our governmental system, and as a whole, the human race has stopped living with earth and lives on earth. And that disconnection is our biggest threat. You know, that's why we pollute as much, and why we have the greenhouse effect, and why we have all these other issues that we're talking about. That's why they're saying that, you know, our fire seasons are so much more violent now. You know, they talk about global warming, about what we're doing with our environment, and that's causing more and more fires to be happening more frequently and to be more violent. And that's because, like I said, I believe, and a lot of people like myself believe, that we live on earth and we don't live with earth. We forgot that we are part of this whole relationship. And we live on it, and we disregard all other things that, you know, everything is alive. Water is alive, the air is alive, the earth is alive, fire itself is alive. And so I think with that, I hope I gave you something to think about. I hope that I didn't bore you. I hope what I had to talk about today was educational to you, and that maybe you have some questions. I would appreciate that. So thank you very much for listening to me today. I appreciate that very, very much. Stephanie, Rachel.
All right, we're going to come back now. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I feel very honored to have had you with us and to learn from you. And I really appreciate everything that you shared. It was very much, everything, since we first spoke, it was everything that I could have hoped it would have been. So thank you. I appreciate that. Everybody, please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. We'll go ahead and relay those now to Christopher as you type those in. Rachel, I remember that you said that you had a couple of questions that you were very interested in asking. Did you want to go ahead and start with those?
Yeah, I do have a few. He answered quite a few of them, though. It was very educational, and I just want to say thank you for sharing that poem with us too. That was beautiful. You said that you pass on the firekeeper tradition to other people. Do you have a few people that you're already passing it on to, like maybe your kids or some other people? I think you mentioned one person you were hoping that would take some interest in it.
That's one of our biggest struggles. Good example is my mother had 5 children. Out of her 5 children, one of us is very traditional. My older brother, before he crossed over 3 years ago, started asking questions and wanted me to pass on things to him. My other brother is very, I love him very much, but he is not very strongly connected to our Native traditions. So he doesn't. My younger sister, God bless her, she's a beautiful human being, acknowledges that she's Native, but doesn't know any traditions, no songs, no language, no anything. And then my older sister, she has at times come in and out of our traditions and customs. So my parents had 5 and only one. I have 2 children, and I have one that's very interested. My son is not that is too far away, So I can't pass those things on to him unless he's right here. He doesn't come down to ceremony very often. He just lived a different life. I don't blame them for that. It's just what it is. So it's very difficult for us as Native people to be able to pass these things down. The competition of society the way it is very, very difficult to be able to maintain that connection. We have a couple nephews. I have one nephew who is will probably be our next fire keeper for our family. So I'm very grateful, very thankful, and very hopeful. I was hoping that maybe it might be one of my kids. We don't know who our next feather keeper will be because I'm also a feather keeper for our family. So we don't know who's going to be the next feather keeper. If I die today, we lose a lot of the knowledge that I know, the songs that I know. And I got mine mostly because I was very, very fortunate that I spent most of my childhood growing up going places with my grandparents who were very traditional, very active in the Native community. So that's how it passed down to me, where my brothers and sisters, they didn't go with my grandparents everywhere. They didn't go to powwows, they didn't go to gatherings, they didn't go to ceremony. And I was there at my grandfather's side the whole time. So when it came time for different ceremonies to be passed down, it was passed down to me. My daughter goes with me a lot of places. So I think some of this will be passed down to her, but not all of it.
That's good to know that at least they'll be passed on with that. Yeah, that's good. I was also reading recently about the Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach. There was a ceremony there recently on the land. And they mentioned using sage burning for cleansing. Does that happen before all the fire ceremonies, or is that something that's just specific to certain ceremonies?
You know, we use our sages for every ceremony, and it's an ongoing thing. So when we burn our sages in ceremony, even like in the morning, you get up in the morning, you can burn your sage to cleanse yourself off just in the morning. When it comes to ceremony, we will burn it before to bless the lands. As people come, we will sage them off to clean them off to get them prepared for ceremony. And then as the ceremonies go, sage will be burned throughout the day, throughout the whole ceremony. And then even at the end of the ceremony, sage will be burned through the whole time that we're there. There is never a moment where there is not a sage bowl being burned someplace during ceremony. When I'm doing ceremony with fire, my portion of it, there is always sage by my fire, and I'm always putting sage in my fire mixed with my tobaccos. So it's an ongoing thing when it's at ceremony, but we use our sages throughout our day, throughout our daily lives, for everything, not just the main ceremonies, but just my ceremony every day for my own personal ceremony that I need to keep myself centered.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Thank you.
I had a question from something that you mentioned earlier about that really kind of struck me about the idea that we live on the earth but not with it anymore. And I think that idea has come up in different ways throughout our Book to Action series. And I wanted to see what your thoughts were on, since the idea is for us to take action and kind of change our habits, our ideas, and make changes. What do you see as something that you would recommend to us, to viewers, for us to share out with our larger audience, you know, even after today, as things that we can do to try to make that shift from living on the earth to living more so with it? What would you recommend for us to do to really make that change?
I think one of the biggest things that I've always encouraged, especially when I go into a fourth grade class, is look into who your people are. Mm-hmm. Find out where your roots are. When we talk about like Native people, we talk about immigrants, we talk about, we talk about people who are, there is no such thing really as an immigrant. We are all on one big earth. We're not aliens from another planet. We all come from here. So we are all indigenous. We are all indigenous people. We are all have someplace, but we've made a disconnect from who we are as me being Chumash. We should be proud of who we are as, you know, whether I'm Chinese or German or you know, or wherever I'm Filipino or Hispanic, wherever. We should be very proud of those. There are traditions, there are songs, there are customs, there are ceremonies that bring us back to the earth, that bring us back to that center thing. One thing growing up that my grandfather always told me was that no matter where you came from on this planet, when you go back to your original people, we pretty much believed in all the same thing, that we came from a creator, and that because we came from that creator, we are part of that creator. And creator made all things, and therefore we are also part of all things. And that is something that no matter where you go on this planet, when you go back to the original people, all people pretty much believed that same thing. Somewhere along the line, we got detached from that as we started becoming too big of a society and started creating all these governments and stuff. We've gotten away from that. So I've always encouraged people, first, find out where your roots are. Go back there, learn some of the traditions, the customs. You'll find out that you have that connection to the land. Then, to be productive about it, go out and do something. Monrovia is extremely blessed. They've got so many people who go out there and volunteer in Monrovia. That is an amazingly beautiful, beautiful, beautiful little forest. Amazing. Whittier has some beautiful areas. They've got some really good volunteers. But if you go down just a couple miles down east from there, you've got the Angeles Crest Forest. Mm-hmm. They need so much help out there. They need so many volunteers to go out there and pick up the trash that people just leave. So go out there and volunteer over there in those areas that need it. Pick up the trash, be among the trees and be among the rivers. Clean those things up. Go out to the beach. When you go to the beach, take a bag with you and pick up some of the trash that's out there. And just being servant to the earth and picking up the stuff that we as a people, as a species have left will make you connected to it. We know that whenever we do something productive, it makes us feel like we're part of it more. So become part of it. Go pick up the trash at the beach. Take a bag with you. A small, one of those shopping bags wraps up into a fist size. Stick it in your pocket. When you go out there, pick up some stuff as you walk along the shore. You see a piece of trash, pick it up, and you'll feel that belonging and that connection because you feel that pride, just like you feel pride when you clean your house and you got a real nice clean house. It feels, oh man, this feels good. You feel that pride of accomplishment of doing something good in your backyard, mowing your lawn. It always feels good to do some gardening in your backyard because you can feel it and you touch it and you see what you've done. We can do the same thing, just on a different scale. Get out there and do something. Go to your parks, volunteer there. Volunteer on something that has to do with the earth and start cleaning it. If every person on this planet, if you think about it, if every person picked up 10 pieces of trash, how much trash would that be if every person on this planet just picked up 10 pieces of trash? That's a lot of trash.
Yeah.
And that's only 10 pieces. Mm-hmm. It's not a lot, but overall, when you look at how many people are on this planet, 10 pieces of trash, that's a lot of trash.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's such a great connection that you mentioned from, extending the pride that we have in caring for, our physical structures and extending that back out to the land. I think that's so important. And I know that's something I'm definitely going to take with me after today. So thank you for that. We have a question from the audience from Catherine, and she asks, how can you advise the audience in learning and respecting some of these firekeeping practices?
That's probably the hardest question I can think of answering. A lot of people don't even know that we exist anymore. So they don't even know that these ceremonies are going, that these firekeeping practices are going. Cal State Pavluna is one of the last large villages, one of the last sites that we have, ceremonial sites that we have in the Los Angeles area. We've been fighting for that for a long time. For 26 years ago, it went to court to stop a strip mall from being built there from the university. We're in court again now. We lose Pavungna. We lose one of our last ceremonial sites, very, very active ceremonial sites. So it's a very difficult thing to answer your question when so many people don't even know that we exist. I go to fourth grade classes. Before COVID, I would go to fourth grade classes and I would talk on the California missions from the Native perspective. Part of the reason was to let these children know that Chumash, Tongva, we're still here. People don't even know that I exist anymore. You know, if I walk around without my choker, without my earrings, without a ribbon shirt, I assimilate very, very easily into the Hispanic culture or other cultures. Sometimes people say I look a little Italian, you know, so they don't even see me as a Native person. So I think part of it is just to recognize that Native people are here to begin with, that we're still here. To recognize that we still are fighting the fights that we've been fighting for 257 years here in California, 553 years here as a nation. You know, we're still fighting the same fight. So by recognizing that Native people are still here, still active, I think is probably the place where you'd have to start. Because without recognizing me being in existence, then how can you even start to recognize that I have ceremony and that one of the ceremonies is fire keeping. So I think it starts there.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you, Catherine, for that great question. You know, this also has me thinking a little bit about something that we talked about the other day when we met, just to do a little planning. You shared a little bit today about how it can be difficult to pass on certain traditions, ceremonies, and songs. And I can imagine, and I think, you know, before you had even shared this, I had thought this myself. What about the idea of using technology to record some of those and kind of pass those on? And could you share a little bit about what you said the other day about how that's not necessarily something that's ideal, and doing things in person is more how you share ceremony?
One of our biggest fears there we have a couple of fears on that. If we look at recording things or writing it down on paper, because for the most part, Native people throughout North America, we lived off some oral tradition. You know, it was passed down verbally and in person to the next person, and it was taught that way. It wasn't written down. The only place you might find it was in a song, you know, so it would be passed down in songs. But again, it comes down to being oral. And one of our fears if it's written down or it's recorded is that cultural appropriation. Mm-hmm. We see it all the time. We see non-natives who want to be Native. They don't look at their own traditions, their own genealogy, their own culture, and look for the beautiful ceremonies that they have there. And they will take our ceremony. They'll take our Inipi ceremonies, and then they will start doing them without any permission to sing those songs, without any permission to do that ceremony, without any true education to do those ceremonies. And then they'll charge for it, and they'll do it from a perspective that they think that they're helping and healing people, but they're not. They're actually, it's a farce. It's a fake ceremony. It's not meant to be just open to everyone at any given time. Ceremonies are done for a certain reason at certain times, and not just every day. Whenever we get a whim, we're going to have a ceremony every weekend. It's not a grocery store type of thing that you just pull off a shelf and do it. And that's one of our fears, is that when we record stuff, that it becomes you know, culturally appropriated, and then somebody goes and makes money off it. Good example of that is that in In Germany, for a short time, it became very popular to do powwows. So there's a whole area in Germany where people will come down here to the United States, they'll go to powwows, they videotape the powwows, the dances, the songs, and they started doing that in parts of Germany. So they started making bustles, full bustles. They started doing fancy dancing. So they would have the same bustle. You look there, same exact bustles there, same exact everything. They started making their drums. They're singing the same songs. They're doing the same song because they want to have these powwows. They want to have this spiritual uplift of having these powwows. Well, they've taken our whole culture and moved it there and started having powwows there. Instead of looking at their own culture, going way, 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 way back and seeing the richness of their own culture and using that. Inipi ceremonies, going into sweat lodge. There's all kinds of sweat lodges. You can Google sweat lodge and go to a sweat lodge anytime you want. And these are people who were trusted in the Native community, and then they went on their own and started doing stuff. And so we have that issue where people are making money off ceremony. Sage itself, you look at traditionals like myself, I never buy sage. We're not allowed to buy sage. You have to go pick it, harvest it in a proper way, in a spiritual way. We have to wrap it a certain way, and it's dried, but we cannot sell it. But you can go buy sage. It's marketed like that. Cedars, you can buy all those things at different places. But as a traditional, we are not allowed to do that. We look down on that, and we tell people at powwows, you cannot sell sage because that's selling our ceremony. So you can't do that. And at powwows, it's actually looked down on a lot, and it's controlled by the people itself, saying they're selling sages or selling cedars. We need to go stop that. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens when we start videotaping and we start putting things down. People can read it. They make up their own way of doing it. Instead of looking at their own culture and their own traditions, their own ceremonies, the beauty there, instead they prefer just to take ours because they're like, whoa, this is such a cool thing. And, everybody wants to be Native until they have to actually be Native. It's a hard life. But for them just to be, copy our stuff is not good. And that's one of our biggest fears.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, it was important to me that, folks here today get to hear that message as well as you shared it with me originally. Because we talk about, making changes, taking action as a part of Book to Action. And I think where we spend our money is a part of that. So I think it's really important that folks know some of that information that you just shared. So thank you. Okay. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to put those in the chat and see if we can get those answered. I'm going to double check to see if we have any more here. Okay. Alrighty, and then Rachel, did you have any other questions as well?
I don't have any at this time. He answered, and this has been very informative, and he answered so many of the questions I had. So I don't have any at the moment.
Okay. Alrighty. I think that's
just as a thing, as COVID starts to lift up, you can get on different websites. You can look at powwow.com. You can go to places. Just start looking at that, and from there you can start looking at different Native gatherings and getting out there and seeing who we are, seeing where we are, getting to know a few of us and attending them as a spectator at first, but then become friends with some of us, and you'll start learning some of these things that we will be able to share with you. You won't get everything. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to teach you everything, but I will share some of it so that you will have the respect that we ask for, so you can gain that knowledge and that understanding, that respect. So when you do see it or you do hear it, you have some kind of knowledge about what we're doing. And like I said, the most important thing is that we are still here. Come and support our Native people out there. There's a lot of bills that are out there in relations to Native culture. We need support. we are one of the most underrepresented people in the country. Everybody talks about all these other cultures when things happen, but you don't hear too much about us. And there's a lot happening. Everything from oil being put through our lands, to lands being stolen, to uranium mining that's poisoning waters on different reservations. We still have a lot of struggles that we're dealing with, you know, and it's out there. You just don't hear it in the mainstream. So, you know, look up a little bit of what's going on with the native people population here in the United States. We don't get a lot of airtime when it comes down to the media. You get a couple here and there, but then it's a very short-lived, like everything in the media. It's a very short-lived thing. Once it sparks, they'll run with it for a week and then they're on to the next story. But when it comes down to native topics, it's even less than that. We very rarely ever get a front page story out there. You know, so look up your stuff in your areas. There's a lot of powwows going to start coming back. A lot of gatherings going to start coming back. And you have an opportunity to meet a few people, learn a little bit about our culture. And maybe if you get close to enough to a couple of us, you know, you'll be lucky enough to be able to be invited to ceremony and come out and be with us so that you can be firsthand part of it. It's a different world. It's a different world because you're looking at old thousands and thousands of year old traditions. So, you know, but it's cool.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great place for us to finish, is, you know, to invite everybody to check in to see what's going on in their local regions. I know we have some from across the state here. So I think that's a great place to leave it for today. So thank you so much for being here. I have a couple of things I'll run through with folks really quickly before we sign off today. I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you, Rebecca.
We have a couple of events that are coming up. Next week on Thursday for Monrovia, we have the Conversation on Conservation, Firescaping in Monrovia, with a very popular local, Giangelo Leos, who's going to teach us a little bit about what we can do to take care of our homes in the city of Monrovia. And then Rachel, I'll let you go ahead and speak about the event that you have coming up as well.
Oh yes, we have Brian Feist, the author of A Fire Story. It's a graphic novel that he wrote after his home burned in the Tubbs fire. So we'll be discussing that on June 10th at 6:30.
Awesome. And then last but not least, you know, we are so very fortunate to have the support of the California Center for the Book and other agencies that made this program possible. And to help support them, we would like to invite you to take a survey that we will be linking in the chat. I think Rachel has that loaded up. So please go ahead and take that after. And if for some reason you miss it, it's okay. We'll be able to email that out to everyone as well. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm very delighted to have you all joining us today. And thank you again, Christopher, for sharing, you know, a little bit about yourself, your history, your culture, and your life. I'm very grateful for you being here today and for getting to know you.
Yes, thank you very much, Christopher.
Stephanie. Thank you, Rachel, both of you and Monrovia and Whittier, for you guys to invite me out here. I'm very honored to have been asked to participate in this. I really appreciate it. And if there's anything I can ever do for you in the future, let me know and I would be more than happy to. If you need contacts, I've got contacts throughout the native world, especially California. So, you know, we can hook up in other ways and, you know, bring some really kind of cool stuff to you guys.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, we would love that. I'd love to stay in touch and hopefully to meet you in person one day.
Oh, I hope so too. I very much hope so.
All righty. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.